let's move on now to the Baltimore Ravens 2023 free agency review. But before we do that, this is the last series about the 2023 free agency portion of the offseason before we pivot to previewing the 2023 season of picks and predictions, division winners. And what does that mean for you? A lot more Baltimore Ravens content. So be sure to subscribe, ring the bell so you can get notified when new content is released and can watch it as it drops. Ryan, let's get into it here.
Let's do it.
The Ravens offseason was can essentially just be talked all about just the waiting of Lamar Jackson here. And I wish I had a better vocabulary because I would have used a smarter word there. But that essentially is what it was. It was just suspense. That's it.
Yeah.
There you go. That's why the teachers were your favorite. Yeah. See, my motto is C's get degrees.
Yeah.
So, but that was the whole saga this offseason. And yes, they did add Odell, and that's good. But there's a couple things I think that went under the radar that I'm very curious on how the team is going to react. And kind of as we start to preview their roster, but just a couple of the key pieces that they lost. They lost three key contributors, I would say, and that's Ben Powers, Clark as well, safety.
Hey, wait, you cut out there. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right.
You stopped at Ben Powers.
Oh, okay. I'll just start this now. What did I say before that? Oh, so, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about kind of some of the pieces that they lost. I thought they lost three key pieces: Ben Powers, left guard; Calais Campbell, and then also Chuck Clark, the safety, as well. Mm-hmm. And those are three key contributors on a defense that was three key players on a team that didn't have as much depth, I think, as some of the other teams would have liked. And everything was focused on Lamar Jackson. The contract they were able to figure out the contract situation, which is good in the long run. But for this upcoming season, I do have some concerns on how they can replace the production from those guys.
No, yeah. And I think you look at this roster, and I think they went – I maybe have coined this term, but I think they went more like the Madden approach, right, where they just kind of put Band-Aids over the offensive and defensive lines, and then they add a bunch of really good skill players. And they went out, they got Odell Beckham and drafted Zay Flowers. And to me, the Ben Powers loss is really big. The Calais Campbell loss, I think, is much more of a leadership loss than like an actual player loss. For me, I think this defense is going to be really interesting because they didn't re-sign Marcus Peters. They lost Calais Campbell, right? They're lacking a lot of that veteran experience on the defensive side of the ball. And I think it's just going to be really interesting how that defense plays out because, I mean, let's be honest, they could be really bad on defense, right? Mm-hmm. They only have Marlon Humphrey in the secondary now, and even he, I think, is getting close to 30. So that's going to be interesting to see. But let's get into this roster and really break it down and kind of see what they have to work with in 2023. So starting on offense, I mentioned the Odell Beckham signing, drafting Zay Flowers. This wide receiver room is definitely the best that they've had in the Lamar Jackson era. Then you look at Rashad Bateman. He was a first-round pick a couple years ago, as well as Nelson Aguilar. They signed this offseason. So definitely, I think Lamar Jackson's best receiving group, and then Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews are a really dynamic tight end duo. So I'm really interested to see what this offense looks like. Tyler Linderbaum did help solidify the center of that offensive line last year, but with Ben Powers gone, I'm kind of curious. Ronnie Stanley is getting up there in age as well. So it's going to be a really interesting offseason to see if this Ravens offense can thrive and do well without maybe having the strongest interior.
Yeah. Well, and that's was kind of my point earlier. Like losing Ben Powers, it just raises up some question marks. Is it replaceable? Absolutely, but it's just a question mark. And if you lose there's question marks on the offensive line. that's not as good. If you have a question mark in the slot receiver position, that's not as big of a deal.
Exactly.
If that makes sense in the long run, especially too considering how the Ravens want to play, which is running the ball and then running the ball, and then on third down they want to run the ball even more. And so it's good that they have this good receiver room, but then if they can't protect Lamar Jackson during the passing plays or create holes or give them time for the run pass option plays, then that's just going to kind of throw another chink in the armor, so to say, to this team. But you're right, though. Skill position players wise, I mean, you go look at all these starters here, the best that it's been in a long time for the Ravens.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I hope this running back room can kind of stay healthy. They did add Keaton Mitchell, who I liked in this draft process from, I believe, Eastern Carolina. And then Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins, all been rotational pieces. J.K. Dobbins hasn't been the feature back that they had hoped after they drafted him in the second round a couple years ago. So keeping that room healthy is going to be interesting. But let's move on to this defense and kind of see what they're working with here. As you mentioned, the loss to Calais Campbell. What sticks out to you the most about this defense?
It's just a combination. Actually, a lot of youth, I will say, just a lot of youth. A lot of guys drafted in the 20s. By 20, I mean like 2020 to now this past draft. So so that's where I wonder. I mean, they did trade for Roquan Smith. That's good, and I think it's just going to be, can they be consistent all the way through? I felt like sometimes last year. Now they did lose a couple of other pieces, as I mentioned, on the defensive side of the ball. I think they can absolutely be fine. But in order for you to be competitive in the AFC, you have to have a consistent defense. And so, as you mentioned, like in the secondary, Marlon Humphreys really is the guy. Can Kyle Hamilton take that next step after his rookie year? Can Rocky Ya-Sin and Brandon Stevens also do that as well? And so, and one of another things I will say is kind of that front seven. I feel like it's not as powerful as it used to be, like with the Ravens team. I remember they used to have a really good defensive front. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but absolutely let us know in the comments. But I feel like it's just not as scary, if that makes sense.
This pass rush isn't formidable, right? Especially, I think you look at Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And it's like they all have solid pass rushes. And I just think that this defense is lacking that threat. And because of that, I think maybe some of the lack of talent or inexperience in the secondary is more likely to be exposed. So that'll be interesting to see. But let's get into what a successful season would look like with the Baltimore Ravens. And they just paid Lamar Jackson a ton of money, right? They went out, they signed Odell Beckham Jr. to a 1-year, $18 million deal, I believe. And then Rashad Bateman going into his third season. They need to be successful, right? Like they need to be in the playoffs. They need to be competing for, a Super Bowl, right? And I think that's what Ravens fans want. They had the 1 year where Lamar Jackson was the MVP, where they were the 1 seed, but then got bounced in the first round. It is interesting to think about this, but I think they're kind of regressing, maybe. And you look at some of the other teams in this division, I struggle to see how that they're really going to compete, right? I think they have a lack of talent on the offensive line position. I think they invested a lot into the skill position players, but Zay Flowers is young. Rashad Bateman hasn't really been able to either be healthy and productive. He can be productive, but then not stay healthy, or he can stay healthy, but then not be productive, right? That's kind of been the story of his first 2 seasons. And then Odell Beckham Jr., I think, has only played 9 games of football in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe 11 games if you include playoff games. So it's really interesting to me to see where this team is going, because they did have a little bit of a changing of the tide from more veteran players now to transitioning to the younger guys. So do you have a similar vibe with them there?
Well, a little bit, yeah, because it's like I feel like their current receiver trio right now is like, I know Zay Flowers hasn't played a game yet, so maybe it's unfair to say this, but like the before, during, and after of what like a journeyman NFL receiver looks like. You know, it's like Rashad Bateman's kind of had that where it is a little like maybe he just is going to turn into this guy that you can go pay a couple $1 million to be on your roster, get a couple hundred yards, he'll move on to the next team. Odell Beckham has been a big name, but if we're being completely honest, from what he came into the season to now, it's like, yes, he doesn't have a Super Bowl ring, but it's like not because he was like the number one receiver in the league.
Yeah.
You know, so he contributed a lot to that team, but in general, though, hasn't been hasn't been he's not a Hall of Fame receiver.
Well, also, too, I think you look at what LA used him as, what they had success in. He was a clear wide receiver, too, in LA. Cooper Kupp was the one drawing all the main coverages and whatnot. Yeah. And so, like, I just don't necessarily think that he's also 32 now, coming off a torn ACL after not having played for a whole year. So
it hasn't played, So that's well, and it's funny, too, because earlier in this video, we're talking about how this is the best receiver room that Lamar Jackson has had. But it's like, I think it kind of goes to show the state of affairs that this receiving room has been over the past couple of years.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just, there's a lot of question marks with this team. I question the receivers. I question the offensive line. I question the defensive line. I question secondary. I like Roquan Smith. I don't question him. And so, so it's hard to be, and we could all be wrong. We could absolutely be wrong. But when you look at the projection, it's like, do they have the potential to make the playoffs? Yes. But I don't consider them a Super Bowl threat.
No, exactly. But I think that the way that they've positioned themselves, signing Lamar Jackson, the contract extension, investing in veteran players like Odell Beckham, it's like I think that they're positioning themselves to be that. And so I think for me, a successful season is they need to be a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah.
And if they're not, I think that they might have failed themselves a little bit. So that to me is going to be really interesting to watch develop throughout this season. But let's go ahead and wrap up their offseason recap there. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. And leave a comment down below on what you think the Ravens are going to do in 2023. And let us know what your favorite offseason addition was. Was it a draftee? Was it a free agent signing? Let us know down below. And other than that, we'll see you guys next time.